anything you need, please let me know. So welcome to the Smoky Mountain Brass Band.
Thank you.
Of the Smoky Mountain Brass Band and also the director of bands at Marshall University. And so it is great to see everybody here. We have a wonderful performance lined up for you today. A wide variety of music. We've got a few soloists that are going to play for you. We also have, some really heart-wrenching music and also some pop, light, fun music as well. So I hope you enjoyed today's performance. We're going to continue with a staple of the wind band literature and brass band literature called The First Suite by Gustav Holst. It's widely considered the first ever original work written for wind band back in So, without further ado, here's the first suite in E flat by Gustav Holst.
Well, thank you very much for coming to the concert tonight. I'm going to play a solo in just a minute, but I'm also going to talk about some of the pieces throughout the concert as JT points to me and says, talk a little bit. And since I'm playing a big solo, I think I'll talk a little bit here just to kind of rest after that last piece. The next piece we're going to play is Whirlwind, and it's by Peter Graham. And now I've been in this band over 40 years, which is hard to imagine because I don't look a day over 30. But back in the day, I was listening to early podcasts. There were live concerts of brass band concerts around the world. And I heard this solo I'm about to play. I said, that's a nice solo. It's fast, it's technical, it's showy, band has a lot of fun, soloist has a lot of fun. I get that. So I bought it. And I played it, and now we get to play it again tonight. And it's by Peter Graham. And Peter Graham was born in Scotland, studied under Edward Gregson, who we will talk about more later, because he's a composer in a song, another solo coming up later. And he's done work worldwide for National Brass Band Championships in Europe and Australia and the US. His piece, Journey to the Center Earth, was used by Santa Clara Vanguard at DCI competition back in 2018, recently, not too far back. Blue Devils used Triumph in Time in 2017. These are really hard pieces of music, and brass bands like to play technical stuff, so that's kind of cool. Anyway, he also won a Grammy in 1999 for Best Classical Crossover. Now, what do you think was the song or the music? Well, it was a piece that featured xylophone. So the guy's very versatile. So anyway, and Peter Graham, he's written pieces that the band plays at Christmas. Way in the Manger is a great flugelhorn solo. He did this piece called Call of the Cossacks, which is really amazing piece. I'd love to do excerpts of it sometime. And anyway, just a great arranger. I have a book of solos just by him I use to play for different things. So this is Whirlwind. Thank you. As soon as I get there.
Vodka.
Wasn't that a nice piece, October? Isn't that a sweet sounding piece? Let me tell a little bit about it. It's by Eric Whitaker, and it was commissioned by the Nebraska Wind Consortium. Oh, that's state. There you go. That's a funky state. What the composer said was, I wanted to write a piece that was beautiful and lush, something I wasn't hearing in the world in band music. And I wanted it to be a little bit like Ray Vaughan Williams, and Thomas Newsom, and like Elgar. I didn't think it would be played much, but then boom, it took off. Now it's my most popular work. That's what he said. And written in 2000, it was a peaceful musical representation of a month in October. And he says, my favorite. And hopefully next October will be much better than before last October, especially at our house and everyone else's. He's written pieces with Hans Zimmer, the composer for movies. He's composed for the London Symphony, the American, he's won the American Composers Award, and on and on and on and on. So that's that piece. Now the next piece, I said I would say something more about Edward Gregson. And here it is. Tuba Concerto by Edward Gregson. Edward Gregson was an English composer born in 1945 of instrumental and choral music, and particularly brass bands and ensembles. He composed a piece called Connotations that a lot of us who've been in the band a long time love, and hopefully we'll have it back up someday. And also Plantagnet, which and that's a really great piece too. He writes challenging things. This piece was first performed in 1976, and it's now, I believe, a tuba standard concerto. I'm sure of that. And I'm surrounded by tuba players right here, and I'm talking about it. He wants to. We're only going to do movement 1 of 3 movements today, and it's a sonata in form shell with 2 contrasting themes. The first, rhythmic and character, the second, lyrical. There's a reference made in the development section of the opening theme of a Vaughan Williams tuba concerto, but only in passing. This is a challenging piece, and it will be performed by our very own Mark Bauer right here. Mark. And Mark graduated from Mansfield University of PA, and he's in the Blue Ridge Orchestra. He's in Four Seasons Orchestra. He's the guy people call up for tuba, and the other tubas here too. And he's a nice young guy. He's one of our youngsters, and super talented. So, anyway, tuba concerto by Edward Gregson.
Nice job.
Another hand for Mark. Disappeared. That was funny. I said, you must have left the building. So we featured cornet, we featured the tuba, and now in his own category we featured John. Now, John Gorecki over here. We're going to do a jazzy piece called Georgia on My Mind by Hoagie Carmichael, written in 1930. And in 1979, it became the state song of Georgia. And it was ranked as the 44th greatest song of all time by Rolling Stone magazine. That's pretty impressive. And that was made famous by Ray Charles, backed up by Renette Leavis sitting on the trombone set. It was on TV, and I recorded it and gave her a VHS copy. Ooh, I'm sure it's still perfectly good, too. Also, Willie Nelson made that famous in '78. And let's see, what's some trivia? Carmichael wrote the song about his sister, Georgia. Did you know that? And it was first recorded in 1930, and the cornetist was, and you know the answer.
Do I?
Big Spiderback. I only asked that because I didn't want to mispronounce Spiderback. Big Spiderback. And today it's going to be featured by John Gorecki. He principal trumpet in the Toccoa Symphony, right? And Pinnacle Brass plays in that. Jazz bands, plays all over. He's a middle school band director and was in Florida. Was a middle school band director with all kinds of
Lifetime achievement, middle school band.
very high awards. And so, John Gorecki.
Thank
2 more pieces left. We're going to slow it back down a little bit. We're going to play a piece called On the Hymn Song of Philip Bliss. It was written by David Holsinger. And so it's based on the hymn How Great Thou Art. Oh, it is well with my soul. My fault. Sorry. Anyways, so, you know, when I programmed this back when, you know, we were just still reeling from the hurricane. So one of the things I'd like to do is just kind of dedicate this piece to those that have been affected by the hurricane and stuff. So, you know, let's just have that in our thoughts while we play this wonderful, wonderful piece for you. This is such a wonderful group of people, and I'm so fortunate to be able to get up in front of them and direct them every week. We rehearse once a week. So thank you so much for your patronage, and we're going to close with a medley of famous British marches, okay? We hope you have a wonderful and safe drive home, so thank you guys so much.
Valley